the fact that they were being persecuted may speak to the early believers believing that he is God in the flesh as well, or else why such strong persecution coming down on them? Is that like would that play into an evidence that they are very quickly seeing him as God in the flesh?
I think that's an early indicator. Yeah, you ask yourself, well, why is Paul violently, and this is his own term, violently persecuting the church? Why is he doing that? This is in Galatians chapter 1, I think. And he says, I've been violently persecuting the church, and then he talks about the change that he has. But you have to say, well, why was he violently persecuting the church? He wasn't violently persecuting the Essenes, the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. He wasn't violently persecuting other Jewish sects. I think he had concluded, and others had concluded as well, that these Jewish guys who were talking about the risen Jesus being God and being sitting at the right hand of God, that that was going way too far. He
Right.
would let the Essenes do what the Essenes did down in the desert. He would let the Sadducees do what they do in the temple and in Jerusalem. But he wasn't about to let these guys blaspheme the good name of God by claiming this Jesus scoundrel who had been crucified as a false Messiah is in fact the God of Israel.
Okay. Um, so another thing I wondered, um, I've heard it said like where Paul will say the Lord said or he got from the Lord, and scholars seem a little unsure as to where exactly was it an oral tradition or from other disciples.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and if Paul as a persecutor though of the way, he would have investigated. So he may have even, is it possible he's also encountering these stories as he's investigating this group, or would you?
Yeah, we don't. I think that's beyond what we know. I
Okay,
don't. I don't think that he probably persecuted them unknown. That is, I think he probably did investigate it to some degree. But what would he? Whom would he have interrogated exactly about
right,
what Jesus said, where Jesus was? He would have had to persecute one of the close disciples of Jesus who had been with him. Remember, the New Testament's not written yet, so you don't
right,
have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have these oral stories that are being told about Jesus by, and some people may have taken notes and written things down. I think that's probably right.
right.
That some people, and The Chosen is kind of an interesting show. I don't know if you've seen that,
Right.
but they have
I've
this
seen some, yeah,
character, Matthew, he
yeah,
seems to be recording everything and writing
yeah,
everything down. I love that sort of creative imagination
yeah.
about, but some of this was written down, but it wasn't in any sort of publishable form. So I think he investigated it, but exactly what he heard certainly didn't sit well with him. Uh, and he did not agree at the end of the day that Jesus was the Messiah. Did not believe he was a good man, a good teacher, a prophet. Didn't believe that he was the Son of God, and that all of these claims were in fact dangerous to Israel.
Right. And then the encounter and then a big turnaround, right? So,
Yeah, a huge turnaround, right? I mean, yeah, he goes from being one day he's being violently persecuting the church, and then as soon as he's baptized, and as soon as sort of the scales fall off his eyes, as it were, he begins preaching that, and he goes away for quite a number of years to study, I think, and reflect, and maybe to go back to the Old Testament and begin re-examining the Old Testament in light of the experience that he's had and
hmm,
thinking the Old Testament in light of the experience that he's had because he knows he's encountered the risen Jesus and he knows now who Jesus is. That's a part of
hmm,
what the Acts story is all about, um, and he knows how closely Jesus is identified with his people. And I think based upon all that, Se Kim wrote a wonderful book many years ago called The Origins of Paul's Gospel, in which he considers this period of time in which Paul was having to go back and rethink everything that he had believed and taught, considered precious. And it's not that he became something other than a Jew. He still was a Jew, still talked about himself in terms of being a Pharisee in
Yeah.
Philippians 3. He still saw himself in these categories because the idea of Christianity as a separate standalone religion did not yet exist.
Right.
He was a Jew whose sort of theological center had moved from being law centered to being Christ centered. And that's a pretty big shift. But theologically, he thought through all of that. In Romans 10, he said, Christ is the end of the law, right? Not
Hmm.
end as in it's over, but Christ is the goal of what the law was always about.
Right.